Hey folks, I'm Chris and I'm your Commander Mechanic. And March of the Machine is here, with forces across the multiverse fighting back the Phyrexian invasion. Some not faring as well as others and forced to call for backup, like the Naya, red, green, white, Precon from the set that focuses on +1/+1 counters with the abilities like support, bolster, and backup, as seen on the face legend Bright Palm Soul Awakener. This 4-mana 4/3 is a Fox Shaman from Kamigawa with the new mechanic of backup. When Bright Palm enters the battlefield, you back up 1, putting a +1/+1 counter on target creature, themselves or another. But if the creature with the counter is another creature, it gains the abilities in Bright Palm's text box under the backup ability until end of turn. Those abilities being, whenever this creature attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature. That creature can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less this turn. This is really interesting in a few ways. Bright Palm has the ability to double the number of counters on them always, but can temporarily bestow that to another creature. It should be noted that if you back up a creature multiple times with the same backup ability, via flickering for instance, it gains the ability of the backed up creature multiple times. So if you threw a Panharmonicon into the mix and doubled the backup on Bright Palm and put both instances of the +1/+1 counter on a single creature, when it attacks you would double the number of counters on it, then double the number of counters on it again. Pretty cool. Though the ability is a bit of a contradiction. It's a strong one that you want to reuse, but you'd hate to reset the counters on the creature doing the backing up. Let's see how we can work with that. But Bright Palm isn't the only new legend in the deck. We also have the supremely strong Shalai and Hallar. This team up of 2 of Dominaria's legends is incredibly powerful, as seen in my Infinite Combo video linked up top. It's a huge hit from this deck. Together, they are a 4-mana 3/3 Angel Elf with flying and vigilance, and whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, Shalai and Hallar deals that much damage to target opponent. Simple and effective. This is basically the same ability as All Will Be One from All Will Be One. Still confusing. And yes, it does go infinite with a ham sandwich like the Red Terror. Pivoting the deck to focus on these two would almost be too easy, and I'll no doubt have a video coming that brews that deck up soon. But before we look at how I would upgrade this Precon, be sure to hit all those good buttons. Like, subscribe, and comment with your additions or cuts from the list. Real members of the crew ring the bell to never miss my brews. Now, focusing the deck on Bright Palm and the backup ability, specifically how to reuse the backup ability, is what I'd like to shift the deck to a little bit more. What that means is that we'll be relying heavily on new cards from March of the Machine, and from within the Precon since backup is a brand new mechanic. And it's on new cards like Death Greeter Champion. Taking heavy influence from Tarkir's Alesha who smiles at death, you can see her in the background, this 3-mana 2/1 human warrior has dash for 4 mana, which puts the creature into play, gives it haste, and returns it to your hand at the beginning of the end step. Along with backup 1, to simply give the backed up creature double strike. This is a great example of a card designed to reuse backup, that temporarily gives any creature you control double strike. Potentially every turn for 4 mana with that dash ability. It's a great way to give this ability to any creature and belongs right up there with Duelist Heritage or Blood Mist as the best ways to grant a creature double strike. What a great card. Also new is Conclave Sledge Captain, a hefty 6-mana 4/4 Elephant Soldier with backup 1, and backup 1. Meaning, this guy could enter as a 7/7 with trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. Or it could give that ability to 3 different creatures. Or it could give that ability to 1 creature 3 times, making a 1/1 a 4/4, would then put 12 counters on it if it dealt 4 damage to a player. Cool and powerful. And I can't not mention Mirror Style Master. Everyone knows how much I love to make copies of stuff, and this 6-mana human warrior does it in spades. With backup 1, whenever Mirror Style Master or the backed up creature attacks, you make a token copy of each modified creature you control, tapped and attacking, which are then exiled at the end of combat. Modified creatures, for reference, are anything with a counter, aura, or equipment attached to them. This can just duplicate your whole board on attack. It's bananas. Anything with an enters the battlefield ability would also create a token that triggers that enters the battlefield ability, like backup. Making copy tokens of these backed up creatures is a smart way to work around the limitations I mentioned. Your first instinct is to blink them, but then they lose any counters you have on them. So next, make token copies. Brilliant and something I'm a bit of an expert on. But it's important to give these creatures haste. They all have on attack or on damage triggers, which is underrepresented in this deck. We do get the new Uncivil Unrest though, a 4-mana enchantment that gives non-token creatures we control riot. When they enter the battlefield, we can choose to either give them haste until end of turn or a +1/+1 counter. And, importantly, when a creature we control with a +1/+1 counter would deal damage to a permanent or player of any kind, it deals double that damage. That's right, it's a one-sided damage doubler, something that's often incredibly rare and incredibly powerful. And in this deck, it's a real finisher. It can grant our backup creatures haste to at least get their on-damage or on-attack triggers, or put a counter on them to ensure they're modified and ready to rock and roll. What's not to love about this 5-mana game ender? Now this leaves us with the difficult choice, what to cut? If I'm making room for just 10 cards, what doesn't make it? Well, we want to be going wider, so any card that cares about counters on just themselves can go. We are about teamwork here. So Genesis Hydra, Fertilid, and Brawn can all go. These creatures are all either too slow, too greedy, or redundant with what we want to be doing. They just aren't part of the overall game plan. Same goes for High Sentinels of Erishan, Alaru Solemn Ritualist, and Triskelion. These are all higher mana value and don't deal with the quantity of counters we are concerned with. We want 1 to 2 counters on creatures consistently, and with these 3, that comes at too high a price tag on them. I'd also like to cut Path of the Pyromancer, Fractured Power Stone, and Ichor Elixir. These cards all have to do with Plane Chase, and while this round of Precons does come with Plane Chase cards, the number of games you'll actually play with Plane Chase is minimal, and it's not worth impacting your deck's construction. Be cautious though. While we do have some ramp in the deck, this removes 2 of the only 5 mana rocks in the deck altogether. I'd also like to cut Hindervines. It's a one-sided fog, sure, which can be really good, but I'm not a fan of fogs in general, and this one has a chance of not blanking damage if your opponent has any +1/+1 counters on their creatures, something that happens a lot more frequently than you may imagine. Now with room for 10 cards made, what do we add to the deck? Where can we concentrate on getting more use from our backup creatures, make copies of them, or help our board swing to go a little bit taller? First and foremost, Panharmonicon. Backup is an enters the battlefield trigger, and doing that again is a must-have. So many cards in the deck, like Rishkar Pima Renegade or Armorcraft Judge, have triggers that can be doubled. This lets us get twice as much out of them without resetting existing counters. It's all value. So is anything that makes us token copies of a creature, like Jaxus the Troublemaker or Dolina Wildmage, both legends that can make us more and more and more of our backup creatures on demand. Very powerful in a deck that already features Flame Rush Rider and Flame Shadow Conjuring. Leaning into that even more is essential. We could also be increasing our suite of backup creatures with Voldarin Thrillseeker and Boonbringer Valkyrie, both from the main March of the Machines set. Thrillseeker being able to give a creature the ability to fling itself is amazing late game, in addition to backup 2 as opposed to the more common backup 1. Getting this ability multiple times is a fantastic way to get additional reach that may be needed to get those final points of damage. And Boonbringer Valkyrie is a build-your-own keyword soup on a creature, giving the biggest threat you currently have, like maybe a Colonian Hydra, flying, first strike, and lifelink. Very powerful stuff if we can be doing it repeatedly. Let's focus on giving our creatures haste too. Some of these great backup creatures need to wait their turns to attack and get in on the fun, so let's get them moving sooner. Rhythm of the Wild grants our creatures Riot, just like Uncivil Unrest, which can play into our +1/+1 counter synergies or allow us to attack immediately with our creatures. And Invigorating Hot Spring lets us not only put counters on creatures we control, but also grants all modified creatures we control haste. Remember, modified is anything with an aura or equipment or counter on them. A perfect way to achieve everything that we're looking for. Also, what would a +1/+1 counter deck be without Hardened Scales? Simply getting us an extra counter whenever a counter is placed on a creature. This is maybe the highest value 1-drop you could include in a casual deck like this. It extends so much of what we're doing that we just can't ignore it. On that same note, Kami of Whispered Hopes is new from March of the Machine and is not only a Hardened Scales, but also a mana dork that grows and grows along with its power. This is a fantastic uncommon from the set and should not be underestimated. A fantastic inclusion. Lastly, I love Felidar Retreat in decks dealing with +1/+1 counters. It's an easy and reliable way to fill an empty board or to make your entire team get bigger on landfall. Putting a counter on all of your creatures on landfall is great, and temporarily granting them vigilance is icing on the cake. It's an amazing add to this deck. But are there any other good inclusions? If we're breaking the bank, what more could we be adding? Let's look at the upgrade. If we're adding some additional dollars to the list, where are they best spent? Unsurprisingly, counter doublers like Doubling Season are real good. The deck already has Colonian Hydra in it, which is a banger. But just doubling the counters we're creating would be good on its own. The fact that this also doubles any token copies of our creatures we would create, well, that's doubly good. Replacing Inscription of Abundance with this much more impactful card is a great power boost. Also, the Ozolith. Oozolith? Ozolith? Well, whatever, we now have 2 versions of this thing that fit perfectly into the deck, allowing us to save our counters and put them on other creatures, or to boost our counters in any kind of counter-based strategy. These are no-brainers. Cutting Ion Storm or Together Forever would make sense for these counter enablers. On that note, Resourceful Defense is a lot like the Ozolith, in that it's a counter saver, and you can activate it to move around counters between permanents, creature or non-creature permanents. Pretty sweet. And in such a creature-heavy deck, we're missing some real gotcha spells. Unbreakable Formation, Teferi's Protection, or Flawless Maneuver would all be excellent ways to make sure you aren't getting a massive board wiped out. While Inspiring Call is great, just having one out from a bad situation doesn't cut it. Be sure to tell me in the comments below if you feel the Call for Backup deck is good enough out of the box, and what your top picks for adds and cuts are. And if you've been inspired to upgrade, you have to hit that subscribe button. Check out these other upgrade guides while you're here, and as always folks, good luck and have fun.